Hi and welcome to Tech Tips with me, Marcus. Today we will go through the color page of DaVinci Resolve, just a bit for beginners. What you see in the color page represents from what you see in the edit page. So when you're done editing, we can go to the color page. And here we have all our clips in the clip view. Here we can see every individual clip that we have in our timeline. And we can also see our timeline up here, so we can see when it goes to one clip to another, or where in that clip we are currently at. And we have our note graph here, and we have effects, and lightbox is a neat thing that I use when I do large productions with multiple cameras to see that all my colors are as close as possible to the other ones. We have our media pool, of course. We have our LUT folder, and we have the gallery, where we can store stills, which is located in the current project. We have power grades that you could save for future projects as well. So moving on to the tools that we are using, we can close down the timeline because we don't gonna use it right now. But anyway, here in primary color wheels is where we do our heavy lifting. If you turn on the note graph again, we have one note that is sitting right here, and we could add notes by going to color and node and add serial notes. There are many different notes that we could choose, but for now we just stick with serial. So if we press here, we can have we will create a new note in front of the first one. We can also add a note by pressing Option S, and if we want to create a note that is before this note, we can press Shift S, and it will be created behind the note that was selected. And we could, if your note tree is beginning to look a bit messy, we can always clean up the note graph by pressing this neat little button, but we won't need that many notes today. The idea behind having notes that we are grading on, because we can go quite deep into grading, and there are many things that we can do to one image. Then it's good to have one idea to each note. So say for instance, if I have set my color balance on this note, I could name this balance, so I just call it BAL, and we do another note that is called Expo for exposure, and we do another note that is called ratio for contrast. So now we can balance the image on this one, and we can set exposure on this one and contrast ratio on this one. So in most situations I start with exposure because that affects the entire image the most. So we can see that we have quite a bit of lift here, and this is a raw image, so I will actually just quickly adjust the exposure in here just to make it more closer to where I want it to sit. And then we go to the primary wheels, and the primary wheels affects the entire image. If we look at this graph here, we can see that the lift affects mostly the darker image, but also affects some of the highlights and midtones as well. Gamma affects the entire image the most, but mostly focus on the lower part of the image, and the gain affects the highlights the most, but also affects the entire image, but not so much in the darker areas. If you go over to the log wheels, you just press here, or we can press Option Z to go in between the color wheels and the log wheels. We can see this graph here that the shadow have a short crossover to the midtones, and the midtones has a short crossover to both the highlights and the shadows. And the highlights have a short crossover to the midtones, which means that it affects less of the entire image and have a more focused tonal range. So when do we use what? I always start with the primary color wheels. If I can't get to my desired result, we see that I have a gap in the shadow here, and it's even more of a gap in the blue area and the green area than the red area. So when I have a balanced shot, we can see what happens if we just circle around in the middle here and see where we get the most separation. It is somewhere around here, very close to where we started. We see that we still have a big gap here, so then we can go into the log wheels and pull down on this lower wheel here. And now I think the black levels are quite good. So we came from this, and now it looks like this. So this is where we should focus on when we start grading. And grading is not always about making a look, but making all shots look like they are belonging to each other. So it matches in luminance and in the contrast and everything, and in the color balance. So here are your secondary grade that we're not going to cover in any detail today, but we could just quickly go through what it is. So here we have curves where we could change the exposure, or we could change individual RGB channels, and Y is just a luminance channel. And we have the color warper, which is quite fun. You have to have a very good quality raw material to make it look really good. Then we have the qualifier, and we have our windows, tracker windows, and we have magic mask, which is brilliant. We have our blur, which is where you also create sharpness and also of course blur it. And we have this key output here. If we have created a look but we think it's too much, we could use this to make it less of an effect of the entire image by just taking down the key output here. And then we have sizing. If we have like something like this, we have a reference still that we want to grade to, we could use this and have it set to the reference still here, and pan the reference still and resize it so it's in the same aspect of the frame that we want to grade at. And here in the scopes we have some different scopes that we can use. I almost always use the parade, but when I really need to tweak the skin tones I use the vector scope. And if you don't see this skin tone line, you just go to the settings here and choose show skin tone indicator. And if your scope isn't as bright as this one is, you can adjust the parade's brightness in this setting panel here. And also one other neat thing is that if we have our qualifier, now you see in the scope that when I hover over the image, it shows me where in the scope this is represented. If you press these 3 dots here and choose display qualifier focus. And that's a real neat thing. I hope this video was useful for you, and if you have any questions about the color page, I gladly will answer them. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and we see you in the next one.